I'm here.
If only he was here.
Can you hear me? Thank you very much. Oh, I better not do that. I'll leave this up here. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, it's good to be back in Madison. I have great memories of here. Our older brother was probably the best athlete in our family, I think. He played football for the Badgers, and when I was a senior in high school, he was a senior at UW, and we used to drive down. It took me a little over 3.5 hours to get here today. I think back then it was more like 5, maybe 6 hours. It's kind of ups and downs when I think about Madison, because, man, I wanted to be a state champion in wrestling in the worst way, and I never qualified for the state tournament. But Ben, my brother here, he's selling that book, $15. Can you afford it? He qualified for the state tournament as a junior, and then as a senior, I was excited to watch him in the finals of the state tournament. Just a few years ago, they had a celebration for the '79 World Team, which I was on, along with 4 other Wisconsin guys. So half the U.S. World Team that year was from Wisconsin. I taught school in Madison, at Madison West. I only lasted 1 year. That was tough. A small town kid in a big city like this. I'd just come back from the '72 Olympics. I wanted to continue to train. That didn't work so good as a teacher, and I should never have taken the job as the head coach. Really didn't do a good job with the guys that I was coaching, because I'd go, after our practices, I'd go over to the university and work out with those guys, get ready for my competition. But it's good to be back here in Madison. I want to talk to you about leadership. And one of the things that's going to help me with that is, you saw the video there of us wrestling. I learned in education class when I was at Stout that you retain more when you use all of your senses. So you got to see some wrestling. I want you to feel some medals. Ben has a set just like this, if I can get him out of the box. I tell people that the first one that I won was actually more exciting to win than the other one. That sounds strange, right? Because this is the wrong color. But when we had our final match in the Munich Olympics, I had lost to this guy up there, Ted Chiavelli. I work with Athletes in Action, and we do summer tours. A year ago, we were in Georgia, not Georgia down there that's the hurricane is going through, but Georgia, which used to be a part of the Soviet Union, South Caucasus, between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. That's where Ted Chiavelli is from. You would never want to call him a Russian. He would not be very happy. I got to see him again. We actually became fairly good friends after the Olympics. We had wrestled each other so many times, and of course that special connection he had got a lot of attention because he beat 2 Petersons. And so in our finals match, I had to beat a guy from East Germany. He had pinned me in the World Championships the year before, but I'm wrestling at a whole different level. And so I was pretty confident I'm going to beat this guy. And I actually had to work at concentrating on my match, because Ben's situation was he had tied with the Russian guy. Back then they didn't break the ties. So they determined who was going to be the champion by how you did against your opponents. So he's got to go against a Bulgarian, and he needs to pin this guy to get a gold medal. So I'm about halfway through my match, head of this guy. Ben starts his match on the mat right next to me. And so I'm thinking, man, I wonder how he's going to do. Is he going to pin that guy? But I have to concentrate on mine. So it wasn't until my match was completely over, I quickly raised my hand. And as I raised my hand, I was looking. The referee had raised his hand. It took 3 judges to call a fall. Before I could walk off my mat, Ben won by the fall. He needed to be Olympic champion. It was one of those Olympic moments where I didn't run off my mat. I ran right over to his, and I gave him a big bear hug. That picture was on the screen, me hugging Ben. When we came back to Wisconsin, the governor of the state came up to our little town up north there. Why don't you pass this around and make sure all the guys get to see it. Oh, you might wonder why the Band-Aid's on the back. Those guys aren't dressed very well in my... My youngest daughter, when she was in 2nd grade, teacher had asked me to show the kids the medals. And she said, Dad, you got to cover those guys up. So she put that Band-Aid on there. She's 29. The Band-Aid is kind of falling apart, but there's still enough on there. So there was a celebration in the farmer's field just down the road from where we live. And someone from the St. Paul Pioneer Press came and showed me that picture. It was on newspapers all across the nation. My parents got a bunch of those. People would send them to Mom and Dad. And when he showed it to me, he said, John, this must have been the greatest thing that's ever happened to you. And I can remember stopping and thinking, how do I answer this? 4 years later, like the video said, Ted Echevelli moved up, defeated Ben in a close match, and Ben had to settle for a silver. But I was able to beat the Soviet guy this time and get one that looks a little bit sharper. Someone gave me a video of my match. I don't know, it was a couple months later after the match. They had copied it off TV, and so I was kind of interested. I don't know if any of you recognize the announcer's name or announcer's voice. That was Frank Gifford. Some of you older gentlemen here would remember Monday Night Football. He really got his start, notoriety from broadcasting the wrestling in '72 Olympics. All that, and he was a pretty good football player too. But so I was interested, what's he going to say about my match? And there's about 30 seconds left. I'm wrestling a guy from Turkey. If I beat him, I'm Olympic champion. So there's a break in the action, and I'm looking up at the scoreboard, and Frank Gifford says, and this is the moment that John Peterson has dedicated his life to. So hold that thought. Was that really true? You guys can start this one over here. People have often asked me, how did you ever go from not making it to the state tournament, wrestling at a small college like UW Stout? That's how I got started in speaking at Leading with Power groups. My best college buddy was a 118-pounder for us. He trusted the Lord Jesus a year after college, and he came to me and he said, John, how come you didn't talk to me about this? I was too quiet a good guy. He asked me to speak at the first one up in Eau Claire. That's where this whole group started. And then I spoke down in Des Moines because wrestling is huge down there, you know, and Wausau, wrestling is big over there. I guess wrestling is pretty big down here in Madison too, huh? So, how did I ever make it from, there's only 2 of us who are not D1 wrestlers who were Olympic champions. A lot of different things, a lot of different factors involved. But the one I want to talk to you about is God put me around people who were really strong leaders, good leaders. And so, when I got my act together and I started applying the things that are in this book, you know how great this book is, guys? This guy, Ted Echevelli, is a pretty interesting guy. Ben and I would wrestle, our U.S. team would compete in the Soviet Union back in the 70s. And we knew that the communist system was pretty hard on Christians. They would print a certain amount of Bibles every year, but never enough for the demand. And so a Slavic Gospel Association in Chicago would print Bibles and then try and get them to people in the Soviet Union. So when we would go, we'd get a box, just put USA Wrestling on the side of it, take it along with our other stuff in. But after a few years, the KGB, the secret police, they kind of started to find out that the athletes are doing this stuff. And so in 1975, we're at this big tournament. The last day of the tournament, one of our teammates comes down to breakfast and he says, "Hey guys, you better hide those Bibles really good because the secret police, they were up in my room looking for them." I worked for 10 years, all during the 80s, with sports people and then kind of an underground Bible school that brought Bible training into Eastern Europe. I think to this day that they really knew who had the Bibles, but it was kind of like a slap on the wrist. You're going to arrest an Olympic champion and a silver medalist for having a Bible? That'd be too embarrassing to the Communist Party. So they just wanted to scare us, and it worked. We didn't give out any more Bibles until we got to the next town. It happened to be in Mahashkala. Some of you won't maybe recognize that. You know, the bombers who did the bombing of the Boston Marathon, they're from Mahashkala. So when we got trouble up there, I don't think it was just communism that didn't like us bringing those Bibles in. It was another religion, too. Of course, they got squelched by the government as well. So I'm making this story maybe too long. This is what happened. Before a snowstorm, before our match, there was a big snowstorm. So we thought that this is a perfect opportunity. We had all these little New Testaments in plastic bags. We went through a park and we put them on park benches. We put them on windowsills. And then we went back and got ready for our match. The next morning, secret police called our whole team together and they gave us a half-hour lecture on, you guys are here to compete. You're not to be bringing religious propaganda into our country. 20 years later, Tedeschiavelli, his son, studying here in the United States, and he came visit Ben. He visited me up there where I live in northern Wisconsin. And we're at the breakfast table, and in our different conversation, his son is helping interpret. He says, "You know what happened to those Bibles that you guys brought over there?" I said, "No, what happened?" He said, "I knew you guys had them. I had the KGB follow you all around the park, picking up those Bibles. They gave them to me. I brought them back to Tbilisi, and I sold them on the black market for about, $150, $200 a piece." I said, "Teddy, you dirty rat, you owe me a bunch of money. Do you think this book is valuable?" So what I want us to do is look at what Peter says about leadership. Peter, I think he would have been a good wrestler, tough guy. Listen to what he says. This is chapter 5 of 1 Peter. "So I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed." And then he goes through a list of 5 qualities that a good leader should have. But did you hear that first sentence? I think we can get an outline from here. A good leader knows where he's been, he knows where he's going, and he's able to lead others along with him. Knows where he's been, knows where he's going, and he's able to bring people with him. We had a guy like that helped us make the Olympic team. Dan Gable wrestled at Iowa State, never lost a high school match, went undefeated all through college until his final match. And he said, "I hate to admit it, but that loss really helped me." And he became Olympic champion. No one scored a point on him when we were at the Munich Olympics. He was a world champion the year before. He led the Iowa Hawkeyes to 15 national titles, never lost the Big Ten tournament the whole time he was there. Can you imagine that? Won the Nationals 9 years in a row. He knew where he'd been. He knew where he was going. He had us so convinced that we were going to follow along with him. The night before we headed to Munich, the whole Olympic team went to Washington, D.C. to be, that's where all the different sports got all their equipment. They had chartered, 3 747s to take the whole Olympic team to Munich. The last day, for some reason, the schedule got turned around and we didn't get a wrestling workout in. Our team was invited to the White House that night, and Ben and I were kind of looking forward to that. Talking to Dan, Dan said, we're not going to the White House. We win medals, we'll get invited to the White House. We didn't get our wrestling workout in. So we took the beds in our hotel room, kind of leaned them up against the wall. I don't advise you to do this kind of thing. They didn't have exercise rooms back then. So we took a towel and put it by the door, made our own little steam room out of the bathroom, and we got a little wrestling workout in. Probably that extra workout didn't help us that much, but the mental part of that helped huge. Our team leader came back from the White House, and I don't remember saying this at all, but he told me a couple years later, he said, John, you know, I came back with our group, and you're the first one that I saw of you three guys, and I asked you, hey, where were you guys? And he said that I said something like this, you know, do you want us to go to Munich to be tourists, or do you want us to win medals? Now, I really had no business saying something like that. I had made the world team the year before and lost all my matches. We went to Germany after that. I lost every match. Both Ben and I, a month before the Olympic tryout tournament, took fourth in the national tournament. But all this time, we were training with Dan. And he just had this way of getting us convinced. And then, of course, he made us work really hard. That's what good leaders do. Peter was that kind of guy. He knew where he had come from. He said, I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Jesus Christ. He knew where he came from. He had promised Jesus, when Jesus told the disciples that I'm going someplace you guys can't go, he was talking about his death. You're going to go there someday. Peter says, hey, I'm willing to die for you. And Jesus said, are you really, Peter? Before the cock crows, you will have denied me 3 times. He tried to be a tough guy. You know, when they arrested Jesus, he pulls out his sword, and I think he kind of went like that to get the guy's head, and the guy probably ducked, and he got his ear. And Jesus looked at him and said, put that sword away. I've got to go through with this. I think he was embarrassed. But boy, when Jesus rose from the dead, and the guys had been fishing one night, and Jesus took Peter aside and said, hey, Peter, do you love me? Peter said, oh, yeah, you know I love you. Feed my lambs. He wanted Peter to be a leader. He saw the qualities in Peter. So Peter knew where he'd come from. Someone who needed not to trust in himself anymore, but to trust in God. And then he knew where he was going. He talks about that in this passage. One of my favorite verses. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. See how he says it in that first verse? As well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. Dan knew he was going to get a gold medal, but he wanted to bring us along with him. So what are the qualities that Peter brings out here? How does he encourage us to be a leader? The first one, he says, shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight. Know the qualities of the people that are under you, that you're leading, and take care of them. When Ben and I had our wrestling camp, central Wisconsin, there was a team, Athens. It's just a tiny little town, central Wisconsin, just a little bit east of Wausau. They were dominating wrestling all schools. They would beat the big schools here in Wisconsin. And their coach used to come to our camp, and he would just kind of sit there. He was a real quiet guy. He hadn't wrestled himself. And he'd bring his guys, and we'd work out with his guys. When I came back and started coaching in our little town, I had a couple boys that wrestled, and so I was an assistant coach at our high school. I asked Jerry Wagner, I said, well, it's a Wagner at our table, isn't it? Any relation to Jerry Wagner from Athens? What's the secret to your success? How do you do it? He gave me 2 reasons. He said, well, first thing is I make sure my practices are shorter than the basketball team's practice, so I get all the good athletes. Second one, I think, was the key. He said, John, I make sure every one of these boys knows that I care about them, and then they'll do anything for me. Our Olympic coach in '72 is like that. He told me a few years after the Olympics, there were a lot of doubts. There were a lot of people that didn't think you and Ben were going to do very well, and I was kind of one of them. But boy, he never let me think that. He would take our team into a locker room, or I think it was one of the dorm rooms where we were training at the University of Minnesota. And he would talk to us and look all of us in the face, and he'd say, we got the best team we've ever had in the United States. You guys are going to get more medals than any team we've ever had. And of course, the way he trained us, the things that he put us through, gave us things to back that up. So a good leader exercises oversight. A good leader also, look at the second thing he says here. Not under compulsion, but willingly, as God will have you. Not because you have to, but because you want to. Not because it always feels like something that's fun to do. Gable was the greatest example of that for me in the wrestling room. Wrestling is a tough sport. You play basketball, you play baseball, you play football. You don't play wrestling. And so there would be times, 3:30 in the afternoon, my body would just be tired. It's time to work out. Gable would come in the wrestling room and say, man, Peterson, you believe it? We get to do this again. Now, I know sometimes he would be tired too. But he chose to show enthusiasm and get us excited about it. One of the matches that I had on my first trip over to Russia, in fact, it's the first time I wrestled Teddy. He pinned me in the second period. I come off the mat, and Dan says, John, you know who that was? I said, no, who was that? He said, well, you were at the World Championships. That's the guy who won the World Championships. I said, why didn't you tell me that before the match? He said, well, I knew you weren't ready. But you know what he did? For the next month as we're training, he had some moves, and one in particular, I could demonstrate it on some of you guys here, but well, we won't do that. Call it 2-on-1 tie. Some Americans make the mistake of calling it the Russian tie. We had a coach who made sure we never called it that because they didn't come up with it. Why give them credit for it? They were really good at it. So Gable had me drilling that thing every day, over and over, and helping me to get excited about it. So the next match I had with Teddy was up in Minnesota in a dual meet. I went from getting pinned, just thrashed a month before. I didn't beat Teddy, but I think the score was 5-3, and I took him down 3 times with that move. The next thing that Peter talks about here is not for shameful gain, but eagerly. Not for shameful gain. There's a lot of things I guess you could talk about there. Do we do it just because that's our job and we can make some big bucks, we can make some money. That was never an issue with us in wrestling because they had really strict amateur rules back then. But the thing that reminds me of is what Ben told me. When I graduated from Stout, Ben had been an NCAA champion, third in the national freestyle tournament. He got invited to our national camp. And he wanted me to come along, so he called Coach up. Can my brother come to the camp? And Coach said, well, if he's willing to work as hard as you do, he can come to camp. So all I had to do is pay my way there. They took care of me. But I was pretty discouraged. We used to run from our little farm down to the small town. There was an implement dealership. It was about a mile there, and then we'd run hard sprints on the way home. So sometimes we'd be taking a break, sitting on these tractors that they'd be selling. And I still remember sitting on that tractor and telling Ben, you know, what business do I have? Fifth in the NAIA, going to this national training camp where there's guys multi-national champs. And he said, John, don't compare yourselves to others. They may be headed for failure. It's too easy for us to look at other people and see how we compare with them, and then want to get a pat on the back when we do something. I think that's shameful gain. Rather than seeking to exercise the qualities and abilities that God has given us. Make sense? That stuck with me for a long time. Thanks, Ben. Another thing that he says here is not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples. What kind of things do your people under you, how do they see you as a leader? I ask myself that. How does my wife see me? How do my children see me? Do I help them get involved in important decisions that are hard to make? We need some help sometimes, right? It's great to get input from people. The bottom line if everybody doesn't agree, somebody's got to make the final decision, and that comes to a leader, right? But boy, how we look at those people underneath us is huge. First time I went to Romania, I spent a lot of time there in the 80s. A really good coaching friend, well, he became a friend. That's the first time I met him. I was riding with him in the car, and we were going from the wrestling tournament to his apartment where he lived. And all of a sudden it started raining. And I see all these cars stopping. And I asked him, what's going on here? How come that's happening? Wrestler who had introduced me to him shared it with me because his English wasn't very good. We'd communicate with each other in German. My German wasn't the greatest. So it was really interesting to listen to this wrestling friend. He said, well, John, you know this communist system, the socialist system, that doesn't work very good economically. Somebody up on the top decides what to produce. And boy, did they blow it when it came to windshield wipers. So nobody leaves their windshield wiper on the car. Peter was pretty smart. He knew the rain was coming, so he already had his windshield wipers on. But there are some people who didn't have theirs on, so they got to stop to the side, pull it out of the glove compartment, put it on the car. Because if you leave your windshield wiper there, somebody's going to steal it. The free enterprise system has the answer for that, right? If there's a shortage of windshield wipers, some businessman's going to figure that out, and he's going to start producing them. Because these decisions are made down here. We don't want someone in Washington telling us how many windshield wipers to produce, right? Socialism doesn't work, guys. Sorry to get too political, but that's what's happening. A Romanian wrestler, he told me once, we were in Hungary, and he said, Man, the Communist Party, they're doing really good in Italy. They got a couple guys who are being elected. And he said, what's wrong with those people? You know, nobody here thinks that system works because we have to live under it. Not domineering, not being it's my way or the highway kind of boss. And which leads me to the final point. He says, clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility towards one another. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourself, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you at the proper time. Rewards will come. One of the best wrestlers in the United States right now is a guy named Jordan Burroughs. He has won four world titles, won the Olympics in London, was the overwhelming favorite to win in Barcelona. He ended up getting beat twice. Didn't win any matches. No chance for a medal. And he talked about it afterwards. And he said, yeah, I was too proud. If you don't humble yourself, God will. I thought that was a great statement. It takes a willingness for us to admit that we've been wrong. It takes a willingness for us to say, I've fallen short of God's perfect standard. A few years ago, I took guys from Augsburg over to Tajikistan. I met a girl who took third in archery. She told us how it happened. There was a shoot-off between the top three. The one who won the gold split her first arrow with her second arrow, and evidently split her second arrow with the third arrow. That's perfection, isn't it? We are so far from hitting God's perfect standard that if the target's over there, we're shooting over here. The Bible says all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. It says the wages of sin is death, separation from God forever. But because Jesus died on the cross, it says, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Is that silver medal still around here? Somebody didn't walk off with it. I said, when I hugged Ben after ensuring that I'd get that and Ben would get a gold, the reporter showed us that picture. Said, is this the greatest thing that ever happened to you? I'm so thankful that God helped me to say no. When I trusted the Lord Jesus as a 12-year-old boy, that's so much greater. In 76, listening to Frank Gifford say, and this is the moment that John Peterson has dedicated his life to, I could confidently think in my heart and mind, no, I didn't dedicate my life to being an Olympic champion. I learned from the mistakes of wanting to be a state champion, sometimes more than wanting to grow in my relationship with Christ. Wanting to be a national champion more than keeping Jesus and loving him more than anything else. So guys, yeah, be a leader. Know where you've come from. We're all born with a dirty shirt. As life goes on, it gets greasy, it gets grimy. We try to take it off, we can't. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 5:21, he, talking about God the Father, made him who knew no sin. That's Jesus. He made him sin for us so that in him we might have the righteousness of God. Righteousness. That's right. Being right all the time. None of us have that. Our dad's favorite verse, he used to quote it to the boys at camp. Not by works of righteousness that I have done, but according to your mercy you saved me. So thanks for giving me the chance to talk to you here. Be that kind of leader. Know where you've come from, know where you're going, and be willing to bring other people with you. Before you clap, let me pray. Father, thanks. Thanks for this group. Thank you for the men that you surrounded me with so I can tell this kind of a story. Help us to be humble servant leaders. So thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.